Okay, welcome everyone. We're pleased to have you here this morning, and this is a follow-up to Act 76, the child care expansion law that also addressed pre-K implementation. And in our efforts to provide equitable access to pre-K across the state, there was a pre-K implementation committee charged with several different things, and it's been working over the last 18 or so months. And there you can find the report both on the House Education and the House Human Services website. We're going to start off with Katie McClinn from Ledge Council just to review the committee's charge from Act 76. So Katie, please join us. I didn't know if that was going to be.
That is going to come.
Yeah, great.
I asked her if she could speak a little bit about how full day is currently defined. Okay, good morning. Katie McClinn, Office of Legislative Counsel. Nice to see everybody. Let me share my screen. Okay, here we go. So this is Section 2 from Act 76 that was passed in 2023. Is that right? 2023. Feels like yesterday. So this section created a committee that was to look at pre-K. I realize House Education took a deep dive yesterday looking at what the state offers in terms of pre-K. But because this committee is sort of tasked with looking how pre-K could be changed, I thought it might be useful just to give a very high level overview that what is currently in place in Vermont is a publicly funded pre-K system for children that are 3 or 4 by the time their district says a child has to be 5 to be ready for kindergarten. Or they could be 5 and not yet ready for kindergarten. The benefit is for at least 10 hours a week for 35 weeks of the year. So very high level, but that gives you a sense. So in terms of the legislative language, subsection A creates the committee. It creates the Pre-K Education Implementation Committee to assist AOE in improving and expanding accessible, affordable, and high-quality pre-K education for children on a full-day basis on or before July 1, 2026. The pre-K program under consideration would require a school district to provide pre-K education to all children within the district in either a public school or by contract with private providers or both. So what we talked about in House Education yesterday is that currently parents and guardians have the option of where to take advantage of those 10 hours of pre-K. They might choose to have those 10 hours of pre-K from a pre-qualified private provider or from a pre-qualified public provider. So this language has a conversation around it possibly just being provided through the public school or just by contract with a private provider or both. And then we're changing what we think of as the pre-kindergarten child here. So child or children means a child or children who are 4 years of age on the date by which the child's school district requires kindergarten children to have attained 5 years of age or 5 years of age and not yet enrolled in kindergarten. So that is a shift from the current 3 years and 4-year-olds.
Katie, can you just flip back up just a sentence or two?
Yeah.
So and I'm not sure how it was described yesterday, but I think that it's important to highlight the pre-kindergarten program under consideration would require a school district to provide pre-kindergarten, and that's not currently the case. Is that correct?
Right now, if a district doesn't offer pre-kindergarten, they would pay for pre-kindergarten education to be received elsewhere, whether it's a private provider or paying another district to provide that service.
So a family has access to it, but there isn't anybody responsible for assuring that that is available
within the district.
Yeah. Thank you.
In terms of the membership of the committee, the Secretary of Education or designee who shall serve as the co-chair, Secretary of Human Services or designee who shall serve as co-chair, Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association or designee, Vermont Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association or designee, the Vermont Director of the Vermont Superintendents Association or designee, the Executive Director of the Vermont National Education Association or designee, the Chair of the Vermont Council of Special Education Administrators or designee, the Executive Director of the Vermont Curriculum Leaders Association or designee, the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures or designee, a representative of a pre-qualified private provider operating a licensed center-based childcare and preschool program appointed by the Speaker, a representative of a pre-qualified private provider providing pre-K education at a regulated family childcare home appointed by the Committee on Committees, the Head Start Collaboration Office Director or designee, Executive Director of Let's Grow Kids or designee, a representative appointed by Vermont After School Inc., a representative appointed by the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children, a regional pre-K coordinator appointed by the Vermont Principals Association, two family representatives, one with a child 3 years of age or younger when the committee initially convenes, and the second with a pre-kindergarten age child when the committee initially convenes, appointed by Building Bright Futures. And then lastly, a member of the School Construction Aid Task Force appointed by the Secretary of Education. In subdivision 2, the committee shall consult with stakeholders necessary to accomplish the purpose of this section and includers, this must include stakeholders with perspectives specific to diversity, equity, and inclusion. And then we get into the responsibilities of this committee. The committee is to examine the delivery of pre-K education in Vermont and make recommendations to expand access for children through the public school system or private providers under contract with the school district or both. The committee shall examine and make recommendations on the changes necessary to provide pre-K education to all children by or through the public school system on or before July 1, 2026, including transitioning children who are 3 years of age from the current 10-hour pre-K benefit to childcare and early education. And then specifically, the committee's recommendations shall consider the needs of both the state and local education agencies, the minimum number of hours that shall constitute a full day for both pre-kindergarten and kindergarten. I'm going to pause there and turn it over to Beth to talk a little bit about the definitions of full day.
Beth St. James, the Office of Legislative Counsel. I am the Education Policy Attorney in Leg Counsel. So Vermont state law currently in Title 16 in the Attendance and Discipline chapter, there is a subsection in section 1071 that talks about the hours of operation for school, and it reads, within the minimum set by the state board, the school board shall fix the number of hours that shall constitute a school day, subject to change in the order of the state board. So every school district is responsible for setting the number of hours that constitute a school day, but within the minimums set by the state board. And then the state board sets the minimums. And for purposes of this conversation, I'm just going to share what the rule says about kindergarten. So for the minimum hours for a kindergarten program to be considered a full day is a minimum of 2 instructional hours. However, in any calendar week, 5 school days may be counted if the total number of hours of instructional time is equal to or exceeds 10 hours per week.
Can you say that last part again?
So if we're just looking at one day, it's a minimum of 2 instructional hours. But in any calendar week, you can count 5 days as school days if the total number of instructional time provided over those 5 days equals 10 or more hours.
So theoretically, 10 hours a week is could be considered minimum full-time.
Yes, when we're thinking about compulsory attendance requirements, yes. Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm moving back to the list of responsibilities of the committee. Subdivision 3, whether there are areas of the state where pre-K education can be more effectively and conveniently furnished in an adjacent state due to geographic considerations. Benchmarks and best practices to ensure high-quality pre-K education. Measures to ensure capacity is available to meet the demand for pre-K education. special education services for children participating in pre-K in both public and private settings, any necessary infrastructure changes to expand pre-K, costs associated with expanding pre-K, including fiscally strategic options to sustain an expansion of pre-K, recommendations for the oversight of the pre-K system, and any other issues that the committee deems relevant. Moving on to the assistance, the committee is to have the administrative, technical, fiscal, and legal assistance of the agencies of education, human services. If the agencies are unable to provide the committee with adequate support to assist with its needs, then the agency of education shall retain a contractor with the necessary expertise to assist the committee. The report, as you know, is due before December 1, 2024. Oh, sorry, on or before December 1, 2024. Committee is to submit the report. You have already received it. The report shall include draft legislative language to support the committee's plan. I don't know if you want to know all about the meetings and compensation. No. Okay, great.
All right. Thank you. Are there any questions regarding the charge of the committee and the sort of background from Act 76? Okay. Representative Easton.
Just don't understand, please, the definition. I think it was on page 5, number 7. It said expand pre-kindergarten. What does it mean to expand?
The infrastructure changes.
Infrastructure changes to expand pre-kindergarten.
Through testimony, I was gonna say, through testimony on this bill as it was making its way through, we learned that pre-kindergarten is not available in all school districts. So
Is that meant to make it available?
it's in all school districts, yeah. And frankly, whether or not to expand the number of hours that it might be available.
In any direction,
district,
correct?
yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you both, appreciate it.
welcome.
Thank you.
Next, I think what we'll do is, we'll ask, Secretary, Saunders, and we'll have Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin, to lead us off from AOE and from DCF.
Great. Good morning. Thank you for having us. I'm Zoe Saunders, Secretary of Education. Today, we'll be providing an overview of the work of the committee. Janet McLaughlin will provide the overview. She was the consistent co-chair throughout the period of the committee, and we'll be walking through the discussions and also the recommendations that came out of the committee. Meg Porcella from the Agency of Education is here also to share more details around special education and be able to provide additional context and details related to the delivery of special education in the preschool setting. And then I'll share a little bit of how the report and the recommendations from the committee have informed some of the governor's proposal in terms of looking at opportunities to expand pre-K.
Great,
That's on Steve.
thank you.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Janet McLaughlin, Deputy Commissioner in the Department for Children and Families, overseeing the Child Development Division, which oversees childcare, children integrated services, and co-administers universal pre-kindergarten along with the Agency of Education.
And I'm Meg Porcella. I'm the Director of the Student Support Services Division at the Agency of Education.
Let me pull up our slideshow here. Oh, sharing is not send request. Okay, we covered our first slide. And I just wanted to offer to you, right, that this is, that we were really excited to look at pre-kindergarten as a shared team, as a state, coming out of Act 76, there is absolutely an intersection, with childcare. And we see it really as a holistic system of early childhood education to ensure that all children in Vermont are getting the supports and services that they need before they enter kindergarten, and that every single child should have access to pre-kindergarten education to ensure that they're entering kindergarten with some of the same skills and experiences before they enter that kindergarten classroom. So in terms of the basics here, I know Lead Council just covered some of it, but I wanted to just cover the basics here is right. First is I was the co-chair throughout. Boucher served as the co-chair when she was in that role. She had to temporarily designate another AOE staff person to fulfill that role last spring. And then when she departed, Secretary Saunders stepped in. Meg has been our consistent person on the planning team from the Agency of Education in terms of supporting the committee overall. Act 76 became law in June of 2023. We held our first committee meeting on July 14th. So that should say 2023 when we held it. And public comment was accepted at each meeting. We did engage a facilitator and project manager for this effort. Molly Loomis served as our facilitator. And as you guys know, this was a very busy time for the Child Development Division in terms of all of the changes for Act 76 that we needed to roll out, as well as a time of transition in the Agency of Education as well. So we did engage an external facilitator to help support managing the process, run the meetings, help set agendas, ensure full participation amongst a very diverse group of committee members with really diverse roles and experiences within the early childhood education system. We did submit a report on pupil weighting in December 23 as requested, and the main report was submitted to the legislature in 2024. And then I do want to just show you quickly the pre-K committee webpage as just a resource for everybody. So this is on the Agency of Education's, okay, stop sharing, reshare. Switched on my screen, but not on yours. Okay. As a resource, so you can see right here is where the links to the two reports that were submitted. We wrote them for you, so we hope you'll read them. And I really think they do a great job of laying out the work of the committee accurately, and some of the key considerations that the legislature and the administration need to grapple with as we consider how to evolve pre-kindergarten in the state. It has links to the public comments that were submitted in writing. There were also public comments in person in the meetings. And then, all of the meeting information is here in terms of the minutes, the meeting information. When you click on a meeting information, that's where you can get to what were the slides that were shared, which could be multiple presentations in one session. So again, if anybody has any curiosity and wants to get into it, we really did a tremendous amount of work. You can see that we had full implementation committee meetings. We also had subcommittee meetings. This special subcommittee here was a specific group that was pulled together to talk about special education. We also split into 3 work groups. One focused on capacity and funding, one focused on program quality considerations, and one focusing on systems level considerations. And we did that based on the specific items that were outlined in Act 76 that you wanted the committee to think about. I want to make sure you guys have that. And then down here is the list of committee members so that you can see who specifically were named to the different seats that were outlined in the legislation. And that's obviously in the report and other places, but just wanted you guys to know this is another place for you. And this also does have the email addresses for everybody who was on the committee too. If there's a specific perspective that you feel like you want to hear from or understand what their engagement was like, it's here for you to be able to reach out to them and understand their experience on the committee. So I'm going to stop sharing this and we'll go back to my presentation. Okay, that's where we're at, right? Okay, so Budget Council went through this. Pardon? Oh, we're not presentation. I thought I did. Okay, here we go. Thank you. Okay. Thank you. Okay, so Budget Council went through this charge. We really thought about it as 4 major changes to pre-kindergarten that we needed to be thinking about. So again, that transition to a full school day, full school year, transition to focusing on 4-year-olds and 5-year-olds not yet enrolled in kindergarten, and transitioning 3-year-olds to childcare. As Representative Wood was saying, having the school district assign responsibility for providing space for all eligible children, and that it was school district choice about when and whether to partner with community-based and private programs and other public schools. So those are what the committee, perceived as its core charges. And ultimately, we did bring together like a really strong range of perspectives and experiences to the committee overall. People were volunteering tons of time beyond what was included in the, in terms of being able to be supported in the number of meetings that were allowed for this committee meeting. Ultimately, sort of the composition of the committee did require to spend really significant time initially getting everybody on the same page about pre-kindergarten implementation in Vermont right now. It has a pretty complex policy history, right? It's at the intersection of 2 different systems. And it allowed for really rich conversation, lots of learning, and new perspectives to really emerge and shared understanding to emerge. But it did not result in a detailed implementation plan or in legislative language. And so the report is very clear about that. We're very clear on that. And we do think, though, that the report, again, accurately summarizes the work that we did, and it's a really important contribution to pre-kindergarten, to the evolution of pre-kindergarten education in our state. The other thing I will note is that, the economic and political context for pre-kindergarten, for public education, right, dramatically changed from when Act 76 was passed until when we were trying to finalize this report last November. And so there was a, to the extent there were committee members that really had trouble engaging with the content, engaging with the committee last spring, because they were really focused on what was happening in terms of the legislature. And then even in this fall with the Commission on the Future of Public Education, again, it was really difficult to figure out how to come up with a detailed implementation plan when it seemed like the foundation was going to be changing. Again, we think this report's a really valuable, is a really valuable jumping off point. And as Secretary Saunders said, it really has informed what the administration's plans and proposals are. Okay. I had a little bit on what is now, but I think Ledge Council copied most of it, not copied, shared. I copied it from you guys. Shared what's there, right? But so the basics, right? It's publicly funded, it's inclusive. One of the things that's unusual about Vermont's pre-kindergarten program is that it's not means tested. Many other states have pre-kindergarten education that is only for a certain segment of the community. That it's portable, especially for young children. There's a lot of sort of developmental and family and logistical considerations. And so that having it be portable has been an important feature of the program so far. And again, it's based on the mixed delivery system, which is recognized as the best practice for early childhood education. And last fall, at the federal level, the Department of Education and the Federal Office of Child Care put out, a policy statement, affirming mixed delivery and using those words specifically as the best practice for ensuring access and quality for pre-kindergarten education. Again, the way that it's currently structured, it is designed to leverage the strengths and systems at each agency. Right, so we jointly work to set policy, support implementation, monitor compliance, improve practice. AOE has things that it leads on, CD has things that we lead on, and we both provide technical assistance and professional development. But again, the whole system was designed to build upon the strengths and systems that already existed, rather than to create something a different system. This is definitely a place where you could continue to evolve and improve, and that is something that our agencies are looking at really closely together. this, in terms of funding right now, right, the students enroll in their school district. And the child is an average daily member, it counts as in the school district's average daily membership, but there is a negative pupil weight of 0.54 to account for the fact it's a shorter school day, even though we know that younger children cost more to educate just by virtue of the fact that you need more people there to ensure foundational health and safety requirements for them. And there is a statewide tuition rate that is paid out from each school district to community-based providers of universal pre-kindergarten. Again, that is set each year and is something that the committee looked at. Okay.
So the purpose of this slide is just to reiterate that for early childhood special education and inclusion in universal pre-K, that all young children with disabilities should have access to an inclusive and high quality early childhood program. And Vermont exceeds like benchmarks and performs higher than other states in providing inclusive experiences because of our accessible and flexible universal pre-K program.
Right. And it's legally required to offer to 3-year-olds, to offer early child special education to 3-year-olds.
Yeah. So that was, I skipped up on my middle paragraph here, but I was coming
Oh,
back to it. That's okay. So IDA, Part B, IDA is where special education funding, but Section 619 addresses specifically children who are age 3 to 5, and school districts are responsible, but through that IDA Part B grant, for ensuring that those children aged 3 to 5, no matter where they are receiving childcare or universal pre-K or not, that they have access to the services to which they are entitled. And we use the term in their least restrictive setting. And sometimes not being in childcare is that least restrictive setting, but they're still receiving services, and it's the LEA's responsibility.
Wanted to just share this map, right? And so the blue is the public pre-K providers. The orange is the private or sort of community-based pre-K providers. And this, right now, and sort of actually consistently over the history of universal pre-kindergarten in the state of Vermont, we've typically had between 60 and 65% community-based providers and 35 to 40% of public school providers. So it truly is a mixed delivery system, I guess, is what I would offer. And again, that follows national best practice. And, it builds upon the resources for early childhood education that already existed in the state. Again, it's just different than K-12, right? The 0 to 5 structure, wasn't in public schools before. So an entire structure related to early childhood education already exists. And so now this is about how are we how are those married, and how are we leveraging the strengths that are available and the resources that are available.
I have a question here, Representative Donahue.
So it looks like there's 2 supervisor unions that have neither public nor private. How do they meet the requirement of the 10 hours?
Let me see. So the ones that are, so it depends. So that if it's some of those are I think one on the edge, right, is a non-operating school district. And so they up in Essex County. Yeah. So that's a non-operating school district. So some of those students would attend one of the approved programs in a neighboring district. And that is something that happens right now. School districts do pay other school districts, for kids that are on for kids based on what the parents choose.
So they'd have to travel to another district to get.
Yes, and which is what they do for kindergarten. I mean, to be clear, for those places, that is what they do for some of them. That's what they do for kindergarten already. And then there is an issue related to access for children that borders of the state that has not been solved yet in the history of universal pre-kindergarten. So for those students that do attend school in New Hampshire or in another state, we don't have a way for those pre-K students to access pre-kindergarten right now. And that's the thing that the committee looked at and has some suggestions on. We don't have, and considerations on. We don't have a formal recommendation at this point. But again, all of these things are tied up in the bigger conversation around public education funding and philosophy in the state and how we're thinking about geographic considerations and limitations for older children as well.
Does CCFAP travel over state border?
You have to be a Vermont resident to receive childcare financial assistance, but you can use it in another state. But somebody from another state can't qualify for it here.
So did you feel like from the data that you gathered that every 3, 4, and potentially 5-year-old has access to pre-K in the state?
Well, so definitely not in those geographic areas I was just talking about.
Right.
And then no, there absolutely are places where we know that families can't find a pre-K placement that works for them. And so in terms, and that the data collection, it needs to be, and analysis capacity needs to be strengthened, which is something that has been a priority of Secretary Saunders, right, since she's arrived. I do have some information on my next slides that I think will be helpful to think about that question. So this is pre-kindergarten enrollment. This is the fall numbers. And so you can see 2014 is when Act 166 passed. And before that, I think it was an Act 72 of, I don't know what year it was, 2007, an earlier year. That had allowed school districts to an option to provide pre-kindergarten and to do it in a partnered way. We were seeing that my understanding, I wasn't here at the time, but my understanding at the time is that the conversation recognized that eventually some school districts were doing a really good job of it. Some school districts weren't doing it at all. And so Act 166 was put into place to expand access. Rather than putting a really specific mandate on every school district, they instead allowed parents, created a process by which there could be multiple approved programs and by which every parent could have access to a publicly funded spot was the intention. And we see that access increased dramatically during that time period, obviously huge drop during COVID. And, we're now pretty much back up at where we were for the pre-COVID levels. So to the extent to which what we were doing before through Act 166 seemed to have achieved a lot of the goal around access, I think that is true. Again, we're all for figuring out how we can, improve access and accessibility for families. And then the next slide, this one's maybe a little trickier to orient yourself to. But this slide is from the National Institute for Early Education Research. They are really the main organization that does a lot in terms of looking at quality and access and best practices for pre-kindergarten education in the nation. And they do a state profile each year. And from this slide, you can see the percent, it's looking at the percent of 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds that enrolled in pre-kindergarten. And so, again, you can see that that access increased, right? After 2016, you see a pretty steady increase up to that. And then we see our COVID drop. And then, we're getting back up there again in terms of the percentage of children who have access.
Representative Bishop.
If I'm looking at this correctly, please correct me if I'm not. It looks like we have about a 10% drop when we go from 3-year-olds to 4-year-olds.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What would explain people opting not to have their children remain enrolled?
There probably are some some availability and capacity considerations that again they're tricky to tease out in the data for 3-year-olds, but also, there are a lot of parents who want to educate their kids at home, or they decide that they want to keep them enrolled in a high quality early childhood education program because that's what has wraparound in summer and is what works for them better than using universal pre-kindergarten. So, and I will say we still even at this, we have second highest enrollment of 3-year-olds in pre-kindergarten education nationwide. So, but it just is, I mean, just entering into the formal education system, some parents, don't necessarily want that as early as 3.
So just to be clear, you're not necessarily saying that or let me just put it this way, am I correct to say that just because a 3-year-old or a 4-year-old doesn't take up pre-kindergarten doesn't mean that they're not enrolled in high quality childcare?
Yes, so some of them may be enrolled in a high quality childcare. For instance, they might be at a family childcare program that's not a universal pre-kindergarten partner. And they say, you know what, I know my kid, I think it's going to be best for them to be in this smaller environment for this, for another year before they head into before they head.
Needs for childcare.
Pardon?
Or
needs for childcare, but I mean, everybody has this many families have this conversation about, right? When are they making these transitions in how they're meeting their kids' needs and assessing their own kids' developmental level too. Okay, so to the extent to which, yes, so perfection, no, Representative Wood, we do not necessarily have like that perfection and that entitlement structure set up. But I do feel like we can see that the trends of the current system were heading us in the right direction. And again, to the extent to which uptake, you would never expect 100% uptake. You would expect three-year-old uptake to be lower than 4-year-old uptake. Our data is aligning with what we would expect to see and really with like some of the best available programming in the nation. So this is also, and I'm taking you on the journey that the committee went on a little bit too, because the committee had all of these questions and we had Mir come in and present this data, come in and present around cost, capacities, best practices, looked at, indications of quality. Like we really dug into the national best practices, the current data on the program as the foundation before we broke into subcommittees. With that, I will say I've got a couple of slides on sort of where the committee landed. There is so much more rich detail in the report, and we're also happy to answer questions. But in terms of the committee recommendations, again, the committee was not able to vote on a full suite of recommendations that addressed each one of the considerations. There was agreement on 4 foundational recommendations. The first was around maintaining the 10-hour week benefit for both 3- and 4-year-olds. This question of 3-year-olds no longer having access to publicly funded pre-kindergarten really took up a lot of time and discussion in the committee, required a lot of hand wringing, had a lot of public comment addressed it. And, ultimately, the vote at the end ended up being looking at these first 2 recommendations together. So we said, the committee as a whole said, please don't remove 3-year-olds. And yes, we should expand, and we should expand starting with 4-year-olds. We took a vote on these first 2 together, and everybody voted affirmatively. There was a couple of abstentions, but nobody voted against these 2 recommendations. And even for the people who abstained, one of them abstained because they wanted it to say a 10-hour week entitlement as opposed to benefit. So they wanted it to be even stronger. And another abstained just because of the concerns around recommending expansion at a moment when the public funding environment is difficult and putting an extra unfunded mandate on school districts they were concerned about.
Yeah, definitely, obviously, the education landscape is much different from when Act 76 was passed to when you were submitting your final report. I'm not really sure how, even if you're looking at that together, that provides an assurance that at a minimum, 4-year-olds have access to pre-K in the state, whether it's public school or private pre-K. That doesn't assure access to me, those recommendations.
I think you are correct. And I think the next 2 recommendations get at the fact that The sense of the committee was that we really need more information on the financial impacts of more financial analysis and greater certainty around the financial impact of expanding pre-kindergarten education before the committee was comfortable voting to recommend a very specific expansion strategy.
Well, I guess my question is, even at the maintaining the 10 hours a week, we don't have universal access. It's called UPK. There's nothing universal about access to it right now, because nobody has the responsibility for assuring that that families have access to it. And families still have a choice about whether they access it or not. I get that. So I guess I'm a little perplexed how a committee, who spent a long time and dug really deep into a lot of these questions. When we're talking about equitable access for students in a public education system, couldn't come out with a recommendation that says all 4-year-olds should have access and the school system should be providing that access or arranging for it. That troubles me, to be honest.
Yeah,
So I just needed to say that.
yeah, no, I mean, that's, I think the committee as a whole, right, like was like, obviously there are people who care deeply about early childhood education, want to ensure that all children are getting what they need when they're 3 and 4 and before they enter the public school system. And I think just, potentially with more time, we could have gotten to that. But again, given, how much, given the broader conversation around public education broadly, it felt like that committee continuing to wrestle with exactly what that would look like, absent the broader conversation, was not necessarily the way to keep, it wasn't necessarily the way to keep going on that particular question.
I understand.
Yeah.
I do.
Yeah.
I do understand, the
Yeah.
dynamics change during the process. We can't lose sight of the fact that this is actually already part of the public education system. So it's not like an add-on. It's already there. It's just not there for everyone. So
it seems to me there were sort of two realities that existed. There was the concern over the cost of public education and the impact on affordability in Vermont. And then at the same time, we also had a new childcare funding system come online, which I would argue has greatly opened up availability to high quality childcare for many people, including 3 and 4-year-olds. To what extent did that new reality enter into the conversation?
It didn't, honestly, I would say that it didn't really enter into the conversation that strongly, because the strength of pre-kindergarten and the point of again, this public funding, right, is theoretically that every child should have access. And there are children that cannot qualify for childcare financial assistance because you have to have a service need and you have to have a specific income threshold without pre-kindergarten education. And we also see pre-kindergarten education that the quality measures associated with pre-kindergarten education program are really important to establishing that pathway into kindergarten, including some of the assessments that are done with children, the communication between the community-based programs and the school districts. And so there was a sense that these two things have been working together well, and they can continue to work together well. And that we shouldn't say just because they're in high quality childcare, they're all set, because there is a set of benefits associated with being also enrolled in pre-kindergarten education.
Is there data showing that the people who don't qualify for CCFAP due to higher income don't have access to pre-K or access to high quality childcare that would prepare a child?
Yeah, so there's not recent data, the 2019 pre-K report.
But that was before.
It was, but a lot of that pointed to the fact that like 2/3 of families said they would make different choices about early childhood education for their child, except for having access to 166 of the families and it was, an external study, right? But for many of those families, it's also about their service need. So you need to have a reason for needing childcare to qualify for childcare financial assistance. It needs to be one that we accept, right? And so if you are, so if you need to have both, all available caretakers need to be working in school, have some other need. And so there's some places where, especially for folks that maybe one of the parents isn't working outside of the home, they don't have access, they wouldn't, those are the folks that especially would not be able to participate. But for universal pre-kindergarten. And for some of those places, right, it might be because, right, they got a baby and a toddler at home, right? It's not like they're like hanging out at home, like they are like they're doing things that are important, right, to their family and their community. And again, what we want to do is create that consistent quality experience as a baseline. And again, I treat Representative Wood's right. It looks different in different places, but what we are saying is at least everybody's getting that $350. We want to move to a place where everybody's getting at least that 350 hours at this very specific quality level with connections to their school district that support early childhood special education, that support that pre-K to K transition.
How about data that was, I've often, having been here, we've had the conversation about universal pre-K and pre-K programs, and I've often asked people who operate licensed childcare centers, if I would spend a week in your system, would I know the difference of when the children are receiving their pre-K and when they're receiving high quality childcare? And they have consistently said, no, it's all really good. All right, I'm gonna figure out where I was going with this, which is to say, to me, it sort of creates a question as to if kids are in a high quality childcare setting, and especially if they're there with a highly new increased CCFAP benefit, but they don't actually have that specific universal pre-K number or program. Are those children entering kindergarten any better or worse, or less or more prepared for kindergarten? Since high quality is high quality, and you wouldn't really know the difference.
Yeah, I think there's a couple answers to that. I think, so like what you're saying in terms of like preparation, I agree. I think in terms of the information that is available to the school district to be able to support those children through, because there are assessments done twice a year within pre-K that are shared up to the school districts, that there is that connection, like those, again, those benefits are really strong for those in terms of having a system, this mixed delivery system. I would also say that the childcare financial assistance program rates do not yet support pay parity with educators within the public school system. So the fact that a family is supported by both childcare financial assistance and universal pre-kindergarten is not like paying for it twice. It's literally, we're starting to get at what is the pay, like starting to say what really would allow us to make sure that those community-based programs do have access to licensed teachers or really highly qualified early childhood educators. So I guess those are sort of my two answers. I think those connections with school districts are really important. And I think that we still have work to do, even with childcare financial assistance changes, to look at pay parity for the educators.
I appreciate that. And I ask, because we are wrestling with the cost of education. Meanwhile, we've had a new revenue stream that is really, I think, supported and really boosted very neededly the childcare system.
Representative Long.
Thank you. I'm not sure whether this is a question for the two of you or actually for Secretary Saunders, but it may not even be able to be answered at this moment. But I'm curious, based on everything I'm hearing right now, and your mention that the landscape has changed in the education front here. How has the work of your committee informed the plan that's coming from the governor right now?
So I can speak to that. So I joined the committee as chair as they were wrapping up in the final months. And one thing that was really clear was we had some challenges in terms of
evaluating data and analyzing data. So that has been a priority for us at the agency, and we will be providing in the coming weeks some additional data analysis for your review based on the work that we've done and based on really the primary areas of inquiry from the committee. The proposal from the governor is very supportive of expanding early childhood education in preschool particularly, and builds off of the recommendations of this committee. So as part of the proposal, it does recommend governance changes along with changes to the funding and changes to education quality to assure shared accountability. Related to governance, moving from 119 school districts to 5 school districts, part of the benefit for pre-K is if you're thinking about building a more robust central office staff, you can have a dedicated pre-K office so that you have that coordination across the district. We found in having conversations with districts across the state that they can, you can go to the next slide,
Okay.
that they can be, that is a really critical resource and not every district has that. So moving to a different governance structure does bring in some additional coordination for pre-K, and I think addressing some of the questions around access. Within this framework, every school would be, the district would be an operating district. So that means that every student would be within an attendance zone and assigned to a public school. That helps to facilitate as you're thinking about the pathway planning from pre-K into kindergarten and having that support from the central office, helping to facilitate that, identifying issues of access and working closely with childcare providers in the area or adding that within the school to promote that continuity. Related to the funding proposal, we have built in additional assumptions and modeling around expanding pre-K benefit. This committee recommended expanding the number of hours for 4-year-olds and maintaining the number of hours for 3-year-olds. So as part of our modeling, we have built in those assumptions. I will call out that there's a couple of different nuances that we're still digging into to refine that modeling, but that is an intention of this plan and the funding that this would allow for expanded capability to offer a longer day for the 4-year-olds as well.
So can I get back to my specific question about then, does the governor's transformation proposal place the onus of responsibility with school districts to assure that there is access to pre-K
Yes.
for 3 and 4-year-olds? So it instead of just being a benefit, it is a part of the educational program.
So it would be through the district that they would have that oversight. And again, having that office dedicated within the region to support the coordination for universal pre-K access. The other piece, so I think we're on my slide now. The committee talks about doing an analysis of the rate setting. So within this framework, we would be applying the base and weights, and so that would have also consistency across settings. That helps to address some of the challenges that we've discussed around teacher pay equity as well within this childcare system compared to our K-12 system. We also know that there's a need to have that broader coordination. And so there would be, as part of this model, kind of an administrative fee for the district to be able to support that with that central office. And I think overall, this helps us to streamline a lot of the data collection and reporting. We know that there's a big onus and burden on many of our providers in doing reporting right now for sometimes 14 different districts is what I talked to one provider around. And so that creates a lot of challenges in terms of just administrative time. There's also creates more potential errors and things like that. So the overall governance structure is designed to create some of that alignment and streamline the reporting and the accountability. We are working very intentionally on building, and I think have done a lot of work in the state of Vermont on building a strong accountability framework for pre-K. As part of our work together interagency is streamlining that process to ensure that we can consistently evaluate, monitor, and support that across settings to address many of the questions that you have raised today around evaluating quality and kindergarten readiness. So what will come in the next 2 weeks will be a report that digs into some of this data, We'll also provide a policy brief relative to how the governor's proposal fits in with education, builds explicitly on the recommendations.
I'm just reading here, it says tuition payments to community-based pre-K providers reflect pupil-based plus weight plus part-time or full-time student count. First of all, what is meant by community-based pre-K provider? Is that,
An approved community provider
so it could be.
for universal private.
Okay, so they would be receiving the base weight or the base plus the weight, then it sounds like prorated for full-time or part-time.
Correct.
What is full or part-time in a world where it's a 10-hour program?
So the full-time is in terms of the funding for the modeling for the funding, it's been based on the hours for kindergarten, so comparable to kindergarten.
Say that again, I'm sorry.
For the purpose of our modeling,
Yep.
we based full-time off of kindergarten full-time hours.
So how would this blend with CCFAP dollars? In other words, if you are calling these full-time students and,
And I'll let Janet expand on that, but an intentional part of this plan, as we think about Cradle to Career, is braiding and blending all of these funding resources. So I think as we go through in more detail, really understanding how we can increase access and quality, there needs to be a greater intentionality, I think, in braiding those funds than we've had in the past. And so we're very intensely coordinated on that right now between the AOE and CDD to ensure that that's occurring and we're maximizing those funds in ways that's going to promote quality in the mixed delivery setting. So we'll be able to provide some more concrete recommendations or improvements. I think in the interim, Janet can share just the amount of dollars and support that is being provided.
Yeah, so right now, so things to keep in mind related to the way it works right now is, right, for families who are paying for their early childhood education directly at a childcare program, right? The pre-K dollars come in and they just come right off the top of what that family's tuition would be, right? So the program receives no additional money for having provided a pre-kindergarten education level experience for those families, even though we know it costs extra money for those families, And so that's been one of the challenges with the current design. That is something that the current design of layering CCFAP and UPK was actually designed to address. We would need to rerun all the numbers if we're switching the numbers, like to have, to look at the, what a part-time and a full-time and figure out how those layer together. In the past, again, we had the sense that it wasn't fully covering the cost of operating, that CCFAP wasn't fully covering the cost of operating universal pre-kindergarten. We knew it definitely wasn't doing it for private pay families. So we need to rerun the numbers. That is the basis of the recommendation from the committee to say, we need to relook at pupil weights. We need to relook at how much it actually costs. CDD has done some of that analysis already. We worked with the vendor. We'll have a report out in the next couple of weeks that starts to do some of that cost of care analysis. The current tuition methodology was established again in 2014, and it's been updated only on an index over the last 10 years. And we know some of the base assumptions in there related to staffing costs and insurance have changed differently than maybe what this index is. So we're in the process of actually doing a real cost of care analysis, looking at UPK quality standards and what the additional costs are of UPK, as well as what the costs are of running a 4 or 5 star high quality early childhood education program. And that is what CCFAP wants to support, right? Is every program being operating at those high levels.
So whether this supplants or is additional to CCFAP or how that all works, that's TBD.
It's TBD, but there's a structure right now, right, where theoretically, it's not designed to, there also is a place, I would say also right now for families where for childcare financial assistance, where you have a service need, we look exactly at how many hours a family needs of care based on what their work and school schedules are. I mean, it's a very detailed process. And we subtract the 10 hours that are funded by universal pre-kindergarten from that family's service need too. So some of that concern that maybe we're paying twice for the same hours is also addressed through that. But again, we do need to rerun these. We need to rerun the numbers now with new information and a new system, which is what the committee recommended we do.
And what I'm seeing, Representative Conlon, is maybe the answer to your very first question about when you enter in the mixed delivery system, the private, pre-K, whether or not you see a difference between the high quality childcare and the pre-K. I think in the future, the answer to that might be yes, because there'll be more hours, more resources. There'd probably be different quality licensed teachers. I mean, that's all what the vision is. So I want to make sure that we have sufficient time for our other witnesses as well. And so any final questions or any comments that I know we kind of skipped over one of your slides. I want to make sure you have an opportunity if you have something you want to say.
I would just emphasize that part of the governor's proposal is prioritizing the expansion of preschool. That has been built into the modeling. As we continue to do the review of the additional funding sources that are available, we may need to make adjustments to what's built into the current foundation formula, but just want to signal a strong commitment to the early childhood education component of our system.
Representative Bishop.
I'm trying to wrap my head around a little bit, the full-time student and the hours that looks like and what that looks like in the out-of-school hours, both during the school year and during the summer. And if I'm following the conversation, it seems like CCFAP and other funds combined to figure out, does that leave sufficient support for families for those out-of-school hours to ensure that working families, two working parents, one working parent, single parent, that they have the supports they need to ensure that they can remain in the workforce and that their children have high quality care.
That's exactly the work we're doing.
Yeah. And I mean, and you can think of it similar to kindergarten, right? So in kindergarten, you have a publicly funded education, and then you can be if you can be eligible for childcare financial assistance for after-school care and for summertime care. So, that option, we would imagine that more of that option would be available. Or there may be 21C program at that school, but they just need to work on but we would need to work on what would be those after school and summer options for 3 and 4-year-olds. Because again, most of that is handled right now through these full-time year-round programs. And so when we're talking, so it's a real part. It's in the report. I didn't touch on it here, but it is in the report around some of the needs that are what we needed there and some of the analysis there. And it is part of just a broader commitment within the administration to looking at universal after school. But even right now, the current analysis, I think it said that maybe 42% of K to it was a percentage lower than 50% of K to 5 kids had access to after school care right now. It was different based on different communities. But again, we'd be adding, 3s and 4s onto that, into the number that we still need to meet there, which again, that's fine. That's our job. That's what we're here to do, but that would be a consideration. And then I would just say, I just wanted to add the one other thing I want to mention is that the committee spent a lot of time talking about quality and quality benchmarks, and that's really analyzed deeply in the report. And there really was a commitment to, amongst the committee to build on what we have is a really strong foundation. We're meeting most of the quality benchmarks already, and to put into place the resources that would allow us transition to meet more of the quality benchmarks. So I just wanted to flag that quality is absolutely an important part of this conversation, and it is addressed in the report.
Thank you. Thank you, all three of you. We appreciate it very much. We're going to one of the unique, but shouldn't be so unique in our legislative work is having an evaluation component of Act 76. And we assign that, the legislature assigned that to Building Bright Futures for the purposes of this. And so we are happy to have Dr. Crossman with us today. Welcome.
Good morning. I haven't been in front of the Education Committee yet. So for the record, Dr. Morgan Crossman, I'm the Executive Director of Building Bright Futures, which is Vermont's Early Childhood State Advisory Council. Hannah's going to be sharing our slides this morning. So Hannah, if you want to pull up the slide deck while we transition. One of the things I want to say before I start through actual talking points is I really appreciate the committee asking questions around the comprehensive system, right? You've asked questions around the data, you've asked questions around pre-K, but also around childcare and out of school and after school care. And we can't think about any one of those pieces in isolation. So for today, I'm going to be doing a high level overview specifically for the Ed Committee on BBF's role,
I'm going to do a quick snapshot of data and the key indicators to pay attention to about the current status of pre-K. Some of that data you heard from the deputy commissioner. I have a little bit more data to share around Chair Conlon's question around how we know whether or not pre-K is making an impact and what that looks like. And then I want to talk about some of the other data that was captured through the Pre-Kindergarten Education Implementation Committee, because while you heard that there was a lot of work done, one of the things that you didn't see was significant survey data, and we have way more data now than we did at the start of that committee. And then I'll end by telling you about the State Advisory Council's recs based on all of that data. So Hannah, if you want to do the slide share in slideshow view and move to our next slide. Primarily for the Ag Committee, Building Bright Futures role is named in state and federal statute. We are your primary advisor on children and families prenatal to age 8 and the early childhood system. We serve as a nonpartisan quasi-governmental entity. We do not directly lobby for or oppose any specific piece of legislation or bill. Our job is to come in and help support you in understanding the outcomes, the system of services for kids and families, and provide recommendations. Our role in the system broadly is to hold the strategic plan outside of state government for kids and families and to coordinate among all of the entities responsible. So every agency, department, and division that serves kids and families, our legislature, as well as private and community-based partners. We monitor the system and convene and elevate voices of families and communities in that way, and then use all of that information alongside data to help advise you and bring you data that you need. So very open to asking me for what data we have. One of my answers will be, we need stronger data collection and we might not have that data. And I think you've heard a little bit of that from our administration leaders. You can go to the next slide, Hannah. In terms of the Building Bright Futures network and the way we do all of this information gathering is that we are bringing together over 500 partners on a monthly basis through a range of different mechanisms. All of the work is based on using evidence and data to inform decision-making, and we're really focused on keeping kids and families at the center. So we have staff and regional councils across every corner of the state of Vermont to say, okay, what are the needs, the tensions, and challenges for kids and families? We have 7 strategic plan committees that are operating to say, okay, we have a vision and we have the strategy. Where are we in relation to those goals? And those groups are meeting monthly and sometimes closer to 10 times a year to say, okay, what do we know? And to bring in national experts and partners across the state to help coordinate. We also have a 23 governor-appointed state advisory council board. Again, every agency, department, and division holds a voting seat. We have a member from the House of Representatives, Representative Garofano is currently holding that seat, and Senator Martine Gulick is currently holding that seat in the Senate. We also have a range of private partners and 2 family leads. The job for us is to be able to be that independent broker of data for you all. And so our job is to hold that collective vision and strategy, but also provide that data and advance the visibility and help support you in making decisions based on that data. So I'm going to start with some actual data on pre-K. Hannah, if you want to go to the next slide, please. When we talk about our monitoring portfolio, there are so many different ways that we're capturing this information for you. So we have an early childhood data portal. So if you have a question on anything related to the early childhood system, nutrition, basic needs, housing, and how those things relate to pre-kindergarten education or other outcomes, you can go to the data portal. We also are in state statute required to provide you a full report on the state of Vermont's children every single year. I'm happy to come and talk more about that at another time. We have data briefs. We are charged strategically by the legislature to monitor Act 76. And in terms of how we support advisement, that might look like for this group, providing you data, indicators, and best practice. So next slide, Hannah, to talk about the pre-K data. On that last slide was my 7-year-old who petitioned to come and testify with me today because she does not have school. All right, so what do we know about our current system? Some of this you just heard from the deputy commissioner and our secretary. The first thing is to look at our trend in enrollment over time. We've seen the increase over time. We are back up now to pre-pandemic levels. This chart does show you that the 2024 data that was provided by the Agency of Education. So we really are looking at having gone back to where we were pre-COVID in that increase over time. And so that's about 8,700 kids in the state of Vermont. One of the other points that the deputy commissioner made was around access. And what I really appreciate is the questions around where we do and don't have access. So yes, we are leading the country in access for 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds. We're second in the country for 3s. We are 6th for 4s. And that's amazing. We want to maintain that access. However, one of the big challenges that we face is looking at our data and understanding what parts of the state for whom and under what conditions. So that is something that you'll see come through the state advisory council's recs. We need a systematic way to be monitoring the system through both the state agencies, but also with communities and through Building Bright Futures. Because right now there is not a beautiful systematic way to capture the information that you all need. On the capacity front, one of the most important things about making changes, again, you heard earlier, is where our capacity lies. We can give you the number of slots or the percentage of what is in public and community-based programs, but the ability to break that down by regions in all the different corners of the state and then provide you information on the breakdown of 3s and 4s, that takes more. We need to have systems in place to do that well. But what it does show you is that about 60% and consistently over time is in private and community-based programs. And that's really important in a rural state like Vermont. You've heard the definition in the discussion about mixed delivery and where we're leading the country in that area. What you didn't hear yet is about child outcomes. And this is what I want to stress the most in this session on data. When we're looking at outcomes for kids, there are 3 main things that we have found in the last couple of years. And this was most recently published by the Agency of Education through the Ready for Kindergarten report that is available. So what we know from Representative Conlon's question, children who have attended a pre-K program before entering kindergarten have higher rates of readiness than their counterparts who hadn't. So to the question of, do we actually see a difference in what is happening in pre-K programs versus high quality childcare? We are seeing that there is a significant impact for those kids, and that 2 years is really valuable versus 1.
So that data you just said is comparing it to high quality childcare, not
It's comparing.
Year-olds who might be just at home or.
We don't have that breakdown in this moment. It is just the alternative for kids that we do not know, the kids that are either receiving high quality childcare or are not receiving service provision. So right now, that data tells us that attending high quality pre-K is valuable and important, and we are seeing higher rates of readiness for kindergarten. And then our national research is telling us that 2 years is better than 1. It's really important for kids to have high quality pre-kindergarten education and high quality learning experiences for 2 years. Sorry, go ahead, Representative.
Sorry, to interrupt you, but maybe a question for you, maybe a question for Janet, but do we know the percentage of 3, 4, and 5-star programs that are considered high quality in Vermont that are not UPK certified?
Not off the top of my head, but yes, we would know.
Okay.
We have that data and can get back to you.
Related to the last 2 points that you're making there, does your data differentiate whether or not they were in a private pre-K or a public pre-K system in terms of their math and social emotional development outcomes?
I believe that the Ready for Kindergarten data does show that breakdown. And I believe, I'm going to look at Janet, that there were not differences, that we actually saw that it was high quality, right? But I'll get back to you and double check.
Okay, thank you.
The other indicator is a new one that I want to call your attention to, where we're using national data and actually seeing that, again, our children in Vermont who are 4 years old are actually meeting or exceeding expectations in math and social emotional development. We're seeing positive trends in that area. So again, we're seeing that those high quality settings that kids are in with high quality early childhood educators is making a difference both in readiness for kindergarten, but also in social emotional skills, development, learning, and in math. So when we're thinking about all of our data, yes, access is important. We need to understand where our kids are, what they have access to, how many are served, who's not being served, and in which corners of the state. Our ability to do that well right now is not great. We need to invest in our data systems. I know our agencies alongside our team are going to be working really closely to develop new mechanisms for accountability and monitoring. But from a child outcomes perspective, what we are seeing over across the board, I would say, is kids are accessing services in the ways that we would want them to. There are definitely challenges with it, but for children who have access to those services, they are doing well. And they're coming into kindergarten ready to learn, and they are coming in with higher rates of social emotional skills and development. All right, Hannah, I'm going to transition to the next slide. So when we think about monitoring from the perspective of the pre-K implementation committee, I want to talk a little bit about some of the data that was captured. So again, the committee did not come out with a report that says, and here is this beautiful new plan that we can implement, and here's the language that you want to use. But one of the most important pieces that I want to call your attention to was 4 surveys that were done during that time with public pre-K education teachers, superintendents, principals, and school boards. So committee members, in addition to the agency leaders, actually spent time out in communities capturing this information and bringing it back to the committee.
Polls or principals? I just, what about private providers?
Great question. So we have so much additional data that was captured even before this surveying effort that gives the perspective of our private program. So even coming in.
So I just want to make sure that it was a balanced
Correct.
look at both. And what I'm hearing you say is that there really was not sufficient data prior to this work on the public side of things. So they spent efforts trying to gather that.
Absolutely. So as part of Act 76, or even prepping testimony for Act 76, one of the things that Building Bright Futures did was a ton of information gathering with private and community-based partners in coordination with folks like Let's Grow Kids and First Children's Finance and Vermont AYC and folks across the system to say, okay, what do we know about the current status of our system? And what are those perspectives? Those were all provided to the committee as part of data. So that is not a part of my presentation today, but we have that as well, if you're interested. The reason this is so valuable and important is because there were misconceptions about how folks were thinking about what we need to do and what we currently have in place to expand our models. I'm not going to go through the extensive thematic analysis. I'm going to call your attention to the high level, but this data is all analyzed and summarized at the end of that report. It's incredibly valuable. So as you're trying to make decisions and want to understand what your partners and across communities think about and what they want you to be thinking about, these are the themes. That's where that data is. There are quotes as well as kind of those summaries. So the first thing they want you to hear is about infrastructure. Anything that you're doing related to expanding universal pre-K, whether it's in public or private programs, but especially for public programs, is what it means for the actual school infrastructures. How are we looking at retrofitting classrooms, expanding transportation, deferred building maintenance, thinking about age-appropriate spaces like bathrooms, playgrounds, heating and cooling systems, right? Things that are different based on the ages of kids that we serve. And again, is reinforcing the need to maintain that mixed delivery model because we do have existing school infrastructure needs. The second is around workforce. And this one isn't necessarily just about the workforce shortage, right? We actually have a need for high quality early childhood educators, special education staff, personnel, support staff, right? And any transitions away from the current model will impact the ratios and the number of people you need in spaces with children. So a lot of the workforce conversation that was coming into play during this committee, the committee's work was, if we were to do something different with 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds, what would that impact be on the workforce across the different settings? And what would it mean for children in terms of access to special education? In terms of the impact on 3-year-olds, again, you heard the committee overwhelmingly come in and say, we need to make sure that we are providing high quality learning experiences for 3s. We know that having access to universal pre-K is supporting developmental outcomes. And the biggest challenges that they were worried about was access to special education. So again, as you're hearing from the administration in plans to think about the expansion, these are things that we want to be thinking about. What does that expansion mean for kids with disabilities and special healthcare needs? What is the impact on our schools? You heard a little bit about regulatory and oversight issues, right? Partners across the state want to see simplified oversight and regulation across agencies. They want that transparency and communication. And I think you're seeing that start to come into play. They are also really calling for a stronger partnership between the communities, the public and private community partners, but also the state and LEAs. So what does that relationship look like? And how do we support the strength of that as we are trying to transition? The biggest thing that came up across the board was finances, because everything I've already mentioned to you has financial implications, right? And it does require significant funding for staff time and infrastructure, transportation, technology upgrades. You heard a lot about pupil weighting and adjustments to what it means to actually provide high quality pre-K. And because of the moment of time we were in when this surveying happened, there was so much discussion about the strain on school budgets, right? And so what is our responsibility to help also educate families and communities in this moment about how school budgets are being handled at the same time as we're talking about big changes in the education system. And so how do we do that well? Another piece that came through was around the importance of mixed delivery. Again, not surprising, but the need to provide flexible options for families, particularly in rural areas. And I think one thing that wasn't talked about until just at the end was the impact on after school and out of school time care, right? So any changes to how we think about the childcare system and universal pre-kindergarten education has a significant impact on the need for and the current offerings for after school and out of school time care. And that is all part of how I want the committees to be thinking about the integrated system, this very comprehensive system of how we're providing services to kids and families. I already talked a little bit about special education, but I also want to say one of the major things we continue to hear is transportation needs, right? So if we have 10 hours a week of universal pre-K, what does that mean for how a child gets to and from different spaces? What does it mean for families' work schedules? What does it mean for equitable access if there is that level of transition? So specifically from the family's perspective, how are we thinking about the impact on families? How are we thinking about the impact specifically for our kids with disabilities, mental health challenges, and special healthcare needs? Before I transition off of this slide, I want to also call attention to areas of agreement, because I'm throwing a lot of hey, here are our concerns and all of the things that we want you to hear as you're trying to make a difference in this system. Everyone wants to see a coordinated approach for pre-K expansion. We want to do what's best for kids and families. We know that we want to maintain high quality options and pre-K for 3-year-olds in a mixed delivery model. The right approach is to expand and start with 4s. Everybody agrees to needing and wanting a high quality, well-educated workforce. We need to truly understand the cost across settings, and we need data infrastructure systems and capacity to actually do a better job of monitoring where our kids are, what they have access to, and more importantly, who doesn't have access and where in the state. Candy, you can go to the next slide. In terms of, again, monitoring the work of the pre-K implementation committee, you absolutely heard earlier around the challenges, I would say, from the deputy commissioner and from Meg and from the secretary about the things that were really difficult during this time. Obviously, the timelines and what it means to reform this very complex system at the same time as you're seeing a range of other moving pieces, leadership transitions across the agencies, so many evolving political tensions. But the biggest one I want to call your attention to is data. everything that you asked for was really hard to get access to. There are still reports that have not been submitted to the legislature outlining what we know about the system. So it was great to hear the secretary say there's more data coming. And one of the most important pieces is that we need to actually strengthen the data systems, and there needs to be partnership in that because it's across 2 agencies and communities and LEAs, right? So there's a major need to have investment there. On the strengths though, and I'm ending with strengths very strategically, the facilitation and the people that were working to build this committee and move through the work was so incredibly strong. So Molly Loomis came in and did a really great job of setting up those work groups. We had committee members allocating so much time. They were collecting data, they were coming in and giving presentations to other committee members. And they were really working hard to say, okay, we want to solve this problem. It's really complex and we actually don't have the data we need to be able to do it, whether it's on the finance side, the school infrastructure side, the how many kids are in X programs and what they have access to and where across the state side. One of the biggest questions that I've heard on the data that I think we need to solve is how does the breakdown of number of hours play out across the state, right? So how do we know how many schools are offering 10 or more hours and how many? What does full-time and part-time look like? Where in the state? And are there wraparound support services? All right, I'm going to transition to SAC Recs just quickly before I leave you this morning. So the State Advisory Council Network endorses a series of policy recommendations. The last 3 years there have been policy recs related to pre-K. So I want to call your attention to them because this one feels most aligned with, but also pushes the pre-K committee's recs a little bit further. So the first is maintaining the mixed delivery system for threes. And ensuring that we have a really robust infrastructure for programs to be able to lead the country in, again, equitable access to for 3s, 4s, and 5s not yet eligible to kindergarten, and that we're modeling that national best practice in maintaining and expanding mixed delivery. The second didn't make it into the PEIC's recommendations, and not because it wasn't valuable, it was time to be able to go through with the committee. So again, the recommendation on behalf of the State Advisory Council is we need a significant focus on monitoring data collection and analysis of current programs. We're absolutely behind in being able to tell you about access, capacity, outcomes for kids and families, and we need to be focused on continuous quality improvement. So again, folks in the room and even folks that are not in the room today are really well positioned to do this work, but it hasn't been prioritized in the same way that it needs to be. And our data infrastructure needs to be better positioned, which also means that it requires additional funding and support. It needs personnel, training, quality improvement, both at the local level, right? How do we make sure that our partners in LEAs and within community-based programs know what data is important and how to provide that information, how to make sure our agencies and potentially in a new model of our education system, that the right players are capturing that information and then all of them have access to it, and that we're coordinated in that effort. So in closing for this group, I think I can't underscore the value of the current system that we have and the need to fix the challenges. We are not in a space where every child has access to what they need. So we do have some problem solving, but we are also in a really great space to expand and really strengthen things that are working well. We need better data and better partnership to capture and track that and monitor it over time. But I think the committee should be proud of at least where we are right now. And as you're thinking about taking next steps in pre-K, I'm happy to come back in and talk to you more about some of the qualitative work and the information that partners have provided.
Thank you, Dr. Crossman. Appreciate your ongoing work in this space, and we will obviously be continuing to work with you and hear from you in the future about it as well. Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to skip to Sharon Harrington next.
On Zoom.
On Zoom. Here we go. Good morning, Sharon.
Good morning. Give me 1 second here. Great.
Floor is yours.
I think that I am here as I should be. Excellent. Good morning. For the record, my name is Sharon Harrington, and I am the Executive Director for the Vermont Association for the Education of Young Children. Some of you may know Vermont AUIC is a nonprofit organization that is the largest membership organization for early childhood educators in the state, and we are the state affiliate for the National Association for the Education of Young Children, known as NAEYC, one of the country's leading early childhood education organizations. In Vermont AUIC works to advance equity and excellence in early childhood education. We also partner with the Child Development Division to administer a broad range of programs and services for early childhood educators. This includes Vermont's Early Childhood Education Quality Coaching and Support Program, known as SPARKS, which directly supports increasing stars, which we've referenced earlier today. Vermont's Early Childhood Education Youth Apprenticeship Program, the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program, Professional Development Grants and Bonuses, and the Vermont Early Childhood Education Student Loan Repayment Assistance Program. I'm not going to be sharing slides today, and I would really like to focus my remarks specifically on the considerations for young children, their families, and early childhood educators. You've already received an incredible amount of information, so my comments will be brief. I'd like to begin by starting about what's working well. At the heart of everything we do at Vermont AUIC are Vermont's young children and their families. We, as early childhood educators, do what we do in service to them. As you've heard from my fellow PEIC members, Vermont's current universal pre-K program is working well for many of Vermont's children and their families, and is also supporting the quality and sustainability of early childhood education programs throughout the state. The current model is child and family centered. It allows families to choose the setting that works best for their child and their family's needs through a mixed delivery system, especially children from working families who may need a program closer to where an adult in the household works than where the family lives. It also supports quality practices in childcare programs and strengthens early childhood program stability. A testament to the success of this approach are Vermont's UPK participation rates and child outcomes. As Deputy Commissioner McLaughlin mentioned earlier, Vermont is currently ranked second in the country for 3-year-old participation in state-funded pre-K and 6th for 4-year-olds. Our state's mixed delivery approach is helping Vermont to achieve some of the highest participation rates in the country. Our UPK program is also yielding positive gains for children. As Morgan just shared, according to the most recent Ready for Kindergarten survey report from the Vermont Agency of Education, in the 2023-24 school year, 87% of children who had attended a UPK program before kindergarten were assessed as ready for kindergarten, demonstrating at least a practicing level of kindergarten readiness on many items in the assessment, compared to the 79% of children who did not attend a UPK program before kindergarten. This is a strong indicator that our state's mixed delivery approach supports developmental best practices for young children, starting pre-K at age 3, limiting transitions for the child, and allowing for continuity of care and adult relationships. On a personal note, I've been able to witness the positive impacts of our state's UPK program from a family perspective, in addition to my view as an early childhood educator. Vermont's UPK program was one of the motivating factors for my daughter and her young family to move back to Vermont. They were able to enroll my granddaughter in a program that best meets her needs and the needs of her family. As working parents, they need full day, full calendar year program, and strongly believe consistency is crucial for their child who was born during the pandemic. They're pleased with their relocation to Vermont and are already looking forward to their second child having access to 2 years of at least 10 hours of publicly funded pre-kindergarten education, because the cost of full-time childcare is one of their major household expenses. Vermont AUIC agrees that there's still work to be done to strengthen Vermont's UPK program, and we believe that this can be achieved by building on what is currently working and continuing to grow our early childhood education workforce. We fully support the PEIC's recommendation to streamline administrative procedures and update the program's funding formula for both public school-based classrooms and childcare program-based classrooms. Additionally, Vermont AUIC supports expanding the number of hours funded for UPK. Nationally, state-funded pre-K programs have shifted from part-day programming to full-day programming. According to the most recent national report on state-funded pre-K programs, 72% of children in state-funded preschool programs attend at least a school day program. This is up from 40% in 2010. Something I just want to elevate is another crucial piece to consider is how to strengthen Vermont's UPK program is our early childhood education workforce. Both public schools and childcare programs continue to struggle to recruit and retain well-prepared early childhood educators to lead classrooms. Vermont must continue to invest in workforce programs, many of which have wait lists and are unable to fully address the current workforce needs. This includes the Early Childhood Education Youth Apprenticeship Program, the Early Childhood Student Loan Repayment Assistance Program, and the Teach Scholarship programs. As indicated in the PEIC report, these supports have led to more early childhood educators in private programs attaining AOE licensure so that they can be qualified to be UPK partners. An effective on-ramp, these programs have supported career mobility in both the private and public sector. Vermont AUIC partnered with the Agency of Education on the Provisional Licensure Project, which has been another valuable pathway to achieve AOE licensure. Additionally, Vermont's early childhood educators have been working since 2018 to collaboratively develop a shared vision for clear professional pathways in this field. Vermont AUIC was proud to submit a Sunrise review request to the Vermont Office of Professional Regulation this past spring on behalf of thousands of early childhood educators. We understand that the #1 indicator of quality in a young child's early experiences is the qualifications of the educator who spends their day with them. As you consider the findings of the PEIC and how to best strengthen UPK, I encourage you to remember the most important part of this entire program, Vermont's 3- and 4-year-olds and their families. We have the opportunity to build on what's already working well, expand access, and continue to ensure we have strong early childhood education workforce to support the education of Vermont's future generations. Thanks so much. I appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you very much, Sharon, and thank you for being here this morning. Okay, and we are going to wrap up testimony this morning with Renee Kelly. Welcome.
Yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks to Hannah from BDF, who's going to share my slides and help me advance. Thank you. My name is Renee Kelly. I currently serve as the Vermont Head Start Collaboration Office Director, which sits within the Child Development Division at within the Agency of Human Services. Just a little background for folks who might not know, Head Start Collaboration Offices were established in the Head Start Act, which was the same act that established our State Advisory Council. There is one of me in every state. Our role is to really facilitate collaboration and coordination between the state to local childcare program, CCDF, and the federal to local program, which is Head Start. So we'll dive into that now. Hannah, if you would advance the slides, please. Thank you. So just some level setting for what is Head Start and Early Head Start. A lot of folks hear Head Start and Early Head Start and they think about childcare, which there are child development service pieces of Head Start, but Head Start can really be thought of more as childcare plus. It's really about comprehensive wraparound services for the child and the family. So in addition to possibly having a licensed center and providing childcare, children and families who are enrolled in Head Start also have access to comprehensive health services, ensuring that they're connected with a medical home, that they're up to date on immunizations, that they're brushing teeth in the mornings. And there's also a strong line of family well-being. So Head Start was really one of the original, when we talk about 2-generation or multi-generation programming, this is really an area where we recognize that a child is within a family, and in order to promote the positive success of that child, we need to support the whole family. It really gives children from at-risk backgrounds the skills they need to be successful in school and in life. And we'll talk a little bit about who those kids are that Head Start programs are serving. It really is about school readiness. Head Start was launched in the 60s, and this was really about part of the civil rights movement. And it was really about ensuring that all kids were ready for school when the time came. And it can be difficult to describe Head Start because Head Starts look different based on the different needs of their communities. So as I mentioned, here in Vermont, we see Head Start programs that operate their own centers. Head Starts can also partner with family childcare and provide Head Start services in that setting. There are locally designed options, and Head Starts continue to partner both with family childcare as well as school districts currently. Hannah, if you would advance, please. So Head Start primarily serves 3 and 4-year-olds and those 5s who might not be eligible for kindergarten. Early Head Start is really serving infants, toddlers, and pregnant women. It's often thought of as an income eligible program, but it is more than that. When we look at income eligibility, we're really looking at families below 100% FPL. Bless you. There are opportunities for Head Start programs to serve families who are below 130% of FPL, but not more than 35%. So when we think about Head Start and those comprehensive services to target under 100% of FPL, we're really thinking about the neediest of the needy. I should also just mention that Head Start programs are federally mandated to also ensure that their funded enrollment is a minimum of 10% children with disabilities. So our arms are open and we're looking to work with the children who have those needs and to try to give them what they need to be successful when they do transition to kindergarten. But there's also categorical eligibility, which a lot of folks don't think about or realize. So any family that receives public assistance, such as Reach Up here in Vermont and most recently SNAP, those families are automatically eligible for Head Start services. Any child who's engaged in the child welfare system, who is a child in foster care. Kinship care is not federally recognized as categorically eligible. However, here in Vermont, our programs do prioritize any child who's within a kinship care situation. And we also do a lot of work supporting kids and families experiencing homelessness as well. Anna, can you advance the slides, please? Just been reading from the screen here. I have moving so here in Vermont, in terms of what our Head Start programming looks like, we do have 7 Head Start recipients across the state. 6 of those same recipients also are funded to provide early Head Start services. Head Start programs are grant programs that are available for any entity, so they can be located in different mother agencies. Typo on my slide, I apologize. Currently in Vermont, we have 4 Head Start programs who are within community action agencies. We have 2 that are embedded within mental health agencies, and we have 1 school district who's also a Head Start recipient. Current funded enrollment as of FY24 was for 1,273 children and families. Those break down into 732 Head Start slots and 541 early Head Start slots. Even though there are 7 Head Start recipients, it's also a misnomer. There are over 72 locations across the state where Head Start services are provided. As I mentioned before, these include partnerships with local school districts and elementary schools, as well as family childcare homes. We also have 4 of our recipients that provide home-based services to families as well. When we think about the workforce, Head Start and Early Head Start in Vermont is employing around 670 staff. And you can see there our federal 24 funding was just over 25 million.
Renee, can I just ask you a quick question? Of the 1,273 children, what percentage is of that? What percentage is that of the potentially total eligible children who are at, let's just use the 100% of FPL and below?
It's an excellent question. I don't have that data available, but I would be happy to do some digging and to get back to you.
Okay.
Excellent question.
Pretty safe bet that it's only a portion of it. It's not 100%. And so I'm just trying to gauge what proportion.
Correct. And
sorry, go ahead. I just want to get your attention, but I also had a question.
Oh, okay.
it lends itself to the importance of coordination as we're talking about evolving the system, because we have those slots, those are federal funds coming in, and how we work in communities to coordinate with families, but also respecting family choice. It's a real key.
Go ahead, Rip, here.
As a follow-up to that, I would also love to see data on the percentage of children that are experiencing homelessness.
Yes. Yep. We can certainly serve by Head Start.
Serve by Head
Yes.
Start.
Yes. I will say we got a national call out from the former Office of Head Start Director for the work that Head Start was doing here in Vermont around supporting kids and families experiencing homelessness. So that data will be a little bit easier to grab.
So say, and maybe another question for my committee colleagues here. If a Vermont family is 100% of the poverty level, would they qualify for essentially fully subsidized childcare under
Yes.
CCBAP as well?
Yes.
Does that create a sort of competition? You just were speaking about there are federal dollars available
It doesn't create competition, but to the earlier I was biting my lip in the back, the earlier conversation about layering funding. Head Starts have to be experts really in terms of layering funds, because in addition to being UPK providers, they receive their federal Head Start, their UPK monies. They also accept childcare financial assistance. So it's a bit of a balancing game on how they're leveraging those different funding sources to account for full day, full year services, as well as the comprehensive wraparound health and family wellness services. Yeah. So in terms of Head Start's role within the PEIC, the Head Start Collaboration Office was designated on the committee. Folks have talked about kind of the areas of focus. I served on the systems level considerations work group. In order to engage stakeholders from the Head Start community, Morgan mentioned there were surveys developed specifically for school folks. I also administered a survey specifically to the directors of the Vermont Head Start Association, which was developed based on those areas of focus. I administered that survey to the 7 Head Start directors in the spring. They responded, I aggregated themes and then shared them back with the Head Start Association for review. Once they thought that looked great, we submitted them to the systems level work group for documentation. I also had Zoom calls with our program liaison at the Office of Head Start Region 1 office in Boston as well, to gather some perspective from the regional office of Head Start in addition to the Head Start recipients. Next slide, please. And I know we're at time, so I'll try to be brief. Brevity is not my strong suit.
Great, thank you.
And I should probably look at my own screen, but I'm going to keep going there. So when we're thinking about value needs, some key considerations that were surfaced by the Vermont Head Start Association, as you've heard before, the importance of family choice and mixed delivery system. So mixed delivery, yes, 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 and the importance of family choice and allowing folks to choose the settings that fit them best. And that is what makes coordination tricky, because even though we have very specific requirements for eligibility for Head Start, we don't want to just say to families, hey, you're eligible here, come over and be in this program. We really want to make sure that they understand and that they're finding a setting that meets their needs. Another key consideration was really collaboration over competition. So to this point, both in terms of the children that we're serving and the workforce, Head Start is invested. We want to find a way to do this well, to work together with our partners to coordinate it so everyone has access. These federal funds that come into the state are an asset to us, and we're really invested in trying to figure out how do we partner to allocate those funds and resources appropriately. Access, if I had $1 for every time I've heard that word today, certainly thinking about addressing needs for vulnerable populations, including kids with disabilities and rural communities. And wanting to be innovative, wanting to try something new, but doing so in a way that's responsive to community needs. Next slide, please. Some practical needs. So thinking about the impact that changes on universal pre-K would have on enrollment and funding. And as we increase the scope of the services that are offered, what does that mean for Head Start enrollment? I think it's been mentioned a few times now, transportation is a really big piece of this for true choice for families and for true access. So wanting to make sure that families, it's not just about having a slot, but it's about supporting the families and getting their kids to where that they need to be. Right now, what I hear from families a lot is from Head Start directors who report about their families, talking about it's often easier for families if they do have a program within their school-based setting to drop their kid off there when they're dropping their older kid off, to not have to go to 2 different places. Whereas if they had transportation, they might be happy with the kinds of services and support they're receiving from a Head Start program. But if the Head Start program isn't necessarily close to where the school is, or it's a multiple dropout, those kinds of really practical needs that make this a little bit messy to understand. There was also a real concern from the Head Start community about these changes and access to comprehensive services, because again, we're not just providing slots in childcare, we're working with families on individual goal setting. We can support families with getting their license. We're working with around mental health issues. There's a whole range of services that families are really getting. And we want to make sure that we're educating families about the options available to them. Because I think the concern is if Head Start enrollment starts to decrease, those are vulnerable families that really would benefit from those support services. And you'll see one of the recommendations later on is to try to support ways to build partnerships between school districts and other community health resources, so they can still be connecting their families based on those needs. Workforce challenges, again, recruitment, retention, and pay parity issues. Janet mentioned this one earlier. Recently, in August of 24, new Head Start program performance standards were released that did call for pay parity and for programs have certain responsibility on ensuring that their teaching staff is on parity with public school staff to support recruitment and retention. And then finally, just some concrete things about aligning standards. There are extensive Head Start program performance standards about how programs operate, and just wanting to be sure as we change or evolve pre-K that we're cognizant of how those systems and standards align. Next slide, please. Legal needs, ensuring compliance and what those implications are. You've heard from some of my colleagues today around the importance of thinking of special education services and how those services are provided in Head Start settings. There are concerns around service delivery being reduced. Again, with workforce shortages, with special education staff, it's often easier for school districts to provide that level of special education within their own walls. It's more costly to do it in community settings, and it does result in access issues for those kids. And then thinking too, as someone mentioned earlier, around continuity, I think Sharon mentioned the continuity of care for children with disabilities. So not wanting to pick kids up and pluck them in all of these different settings throughout their day when transitions are difficult. Really, again, understanding that high quality care and education comes from that relationship. And wanting those transitions to be minimized and for those kids to really have access to those strong continuing relationships with their caregivers. Next slide, please. 2 left, I promise. System oversight, considerations and recommendations. We talked a little bit about this before. There's a concern that if the choice is left to districts on whether or not to partner, that would result in inequitable access, because you will have some districts that are choosing to partner and other districts that aren't. The recognition that, again, with changing oversight requirements, that there's a need for additional training and administrative alignment with those new systems. But overall, really just trying to promote multidisciplinary cross-sector teams, encouraging those relationships in communities to work together on behalf of meeting the needs for kids and families holistically. So. And last but not least, next slide, please, Hannah. Family needs. And this is a big one, and it's one of the hardest ones to put your arms around because family needs are so different. But the Head Start community really wanted to make sure their thoughts were elevated in terms of the importance of ensuring support and access for families. And there's that partnership piece around connections between healthcare and social service programs, making sure that programming itself is responsive to family needs. It's not a drop off and pick up and we'll see you later, but it's a how are things going, and is there a way that we can support you and your family to help your child be successful? And thinking about the frameworks that we use to think about how we engage with families in decision-making for what's best for their kids.
Thank you very much, Renee. Appreciate the role that Head Start plays in supporting some of our most vulnerable families and children, and the challenges as well, especially in the collaboration and coordination across systems for kids. So appreciate that a lot. So that wraps up our testimony, folks, for this morning. I think, to summarize what we heard today, one is that we have a lot of positives, a lot of strengths to build on, that the pre-K access through Act 166 has really increased access. It's not universal yet, and we still do have We still do have areas where children need access. We heard that it's important to maintain a mixed delivery system, that we need to have some more consistent data measurements and evaluation components that are variable depending upon the system right now. And that a lot of this is wrapped up in the work of our colleagues in education and reviewing the governor's education proposal and how that ends up getting worked out. But we did hear that a strong pre-K system is part of that proposal, where school districts would have a responsibility to assure access to pre-K, which doesn't exist right now in some parts of the state. So thank everybody for your time and attention this morning. Anything?
No, thank you very much for basically running the show here. Appreciate it.
Okay.